When we set about to think about how to build state capability, we think about building the capability of the organizations to implement policy, which means we need a definition of each of those terms. What is a policy? Well, a policy is a rule that tells you what to do in what conditions. So a fire insurance policy says if your house burns down, insurance company pays you for your house. That's a policy. There's some fact about the world. Did your house burn down? That implies an action by some agent. Here they will pay you for your house. So organizational capability is complex because it requires the agents of the organization to look at the world and to do the right thing that achieves the objectives of the policy. Now this can start out very simple, delivering the mail. A postman looks at a package, looks at a letter, there's an address on the letter. He knows the relevant fact about the world is the address out the letter that tells him what to do. I route it this way, I route it that way, I walk to this house and not that house. It tells him what to do. The organizational capability is the capability of the organization to induce its agents to look at the world and do the right thing. Now, it turns out that's much more difficult to do in practice than to describe. So some colleagues of ours here at Harvard did a very simple study where they just mailed a bunch of misaddressed letters to countries around the world. Now, all of these countries have a policy of what to do with those letters. It's that you return them to the address they came from if you can't find the address that it's supposed to go to. And all countries in the world participate in a postal customs unit that specify all the letters have to be back within 30 days. If a country can't deliver it, it's supposed to return it to the country of origin within 30 days. So they just did a simple study of what's the capability of the post office to implement that agreed upon policy. And what they found is enormous variation around the world. Countries like Colombia, 90% of the letters mailed from the United States to a misaddressed address in Colombia came back within 90 days. But many countries in the world essentially had no capability of implementing this policy. 25 countries in the world, none of the letters came back. Now that's not very surprising since they mailed some letters to Somalia, that none of the letters came back from Somalia because there's zero governmental capability for any policy. But even countries like Tanzania, there were no letters, misaddressed letters that came back, which means the capability of the post office to implement that policy was zero. Among the countries in the lowest quartile by income, the poor countries, only 1 of 10 letters on average came back. So the capability of this very simple function of postmen to look at the world, decide that they can't find the address, and carry out a very simple policy of returning the letter simply wasn't being implemented. Now this also extends to even to regulatory functions of the state. For instance, in India, some colleagues of ours here at the Kennedy School did a study seeing how people got driver's licenses. Now the driver's license policy in law looks very simple. Prove you can drive, prove other facts about you and your appropriate age and residence, and we'll authorize you to drive. The problem is that people hired touts. And what happened is these touts completely subverted the actual implementation of the policy. So they found if you hired a tout, you only had a 12% chance of actually taking the legally required driver's examination before the agents of the state responsible for giving you a driver's license gave you a driver's license and authorized you to drive. If you didn't hire a tout, turns out 95% of those people had to take the legally required driving exam, and most of them failed. Now, when they followed up, they found that the people who had hired a tout and gotten a driver's license without taking the driver's license mostly couldn't drive. So when we think about the capability for policy implementation, it's just as simple as, can we get the agents responsible for policy implementation in the organizations they're in to look at the world and do the right thing?